Okay, we are back. We have been together for 5 hours. We have been talking a lot. And so I will be very brief. I want us to move from talk to action, basically. And so I will not take a lot of your time, but I hope that I will take a lot of your brain space. So this weekend and in next months, you will be like focused on action. An action that is fearless, an action that is, it will cost you something. It will cost you time. It will cost you effort. It will cost you, it's like building muscles for what is coming next. Because we have to admit some realities. After listening to all of you today, we have to admit something. Our boat is sinking, but we are not in the same boat together. And different boats are sinking at different speed and time. I don't want to be this is not about being hopeless, but it's a serious situation, and this call for action, it cannot be about a better future of flowers and rainbows. The reality is a complex problem that we have before us, but we have all the skills. The skills are, and the ability to solve it, is unevenly distributed, and that's what we need to fix in the next months, in the next days, every day. Equality and our calls for equality shouldn't be just a metaphor. We say oh yes, we are on this together, like global solidarity, but then we don't walk to the actions that we need to make it happen. And because the reality, if we do not admit the sharp inequalities in this problem, if we do not admit that our contribution to the problem really is depending on where we are on the place of our privilege, and that we need to give up a little bit of that privilege to fix things, we are not going to solve this. I have been reading a lot of, I have been focusing my reading time on the greatest problems that we solved together in the aftermath of the wars the last century, for example, and in other hunger crises and other difficulties that humanity faced. We were never better prepared for a global crisis than today. We have all the tools at our disposal. And what seems to be missing, we have all these instruments. We have all these brilliant young people, never so many brilliant young people than today. Never so many humans on planet Earth. And equipped with knowledge, with enthusiasm, with possibilities. Never so misguided and disconnected. Never so leaderless. Even if, some people in the anarchy movement might be celebrating this lack of leadership. Because it's not only the lack of leadership, but it's we have the solution right in front of us, but we don't have these directors or multiple directors to start playing the music. But it seems to me that we are as many of the talks today, we're almost ready. And we shouldn't hesitate to start playing. Because I think that if we start playing our role in this complex problem, the guiding principles will emerge. But when I was saying, okay, we are leaderless, we don't know, actually I corrected myself and said no. The fact is, we have a system that was built in the aftermath of the most terrible war that humanity ever witnessed. And it's still there, but we have forgotten it. We have multilateralism where every country is equal and every citizen in the world is equal. And we need to make it work, and it's possible. That's the first thing that I would like to bring up to the table, how to make the global system work again. I don't think that it's hopeless. I think that the principles of its design are very solid. And I think that we have listened too much to those in parallel powers that tell us that it doesn't work. But we have solved amazing challenges over very short time, like literacy. Imagine that so many people couldn't even read or write some years ago. So that's the first thing. We are privileged. We are not equal. We need to give a little bit more to compensate. The second, let's rescue multilateralism. The third will be like, let's rescue local and national politics. Imagine if all these people that talk today here were in political parties and were risking themselves to take the responsibility to lead public affairs. I think that it will be a very different place. But I don't know why the most brilliant minds of our generation are so hesitant to walk the route of politics. Oh, no, it's corrupt, it's broken, it doesn't function. But if we don't take that step, we will see, the constant decay and collapse of a system that at the end guarantees that every citizen is represented. And so we might need, we might look back at recent time with the Pirate Party. It made a big difference with access to knowledge issues, or with some of the Green parties, or some, politics. We shouldn't be afraid of politics to make the transformational changes that we need. The other thing is strategic focus. It seems that our movement of movements is all over the place. And we, even this, digital New Deal and this space, everything feels so fragmented. Everything seems like little sub-micro ghettos of the artists working in AI and the other artists working on recyclables and the other doing music. This is a serious problem that is multidimensional, but we need to see it. We need to regroup efforts and be strategic and focused, because it seems that time is running out for being too dispersed. Resources are not a lot, and we are making very little impact, even if we talk a lot and produce a lot of content. And the last point I will make is that it has to be fun, because I have the opportunity recently to, just before this talk, to be sharing thoughts with young people in Mali, in Gambia, in Egypt, in different places, complex places. And the prevalent feeling is one of hopelessness and despair. And if we do not make any project viable to save our world and to save our planet, if we do not make it about a fun challenge, something that people will feel satisfaction and will feel that there's a project beyond survival on it, it will not take off. It will not take off. The other side, the project of the other side is the extractive, destructive structure that we are facing is fear, is apprehension, it is hate. If this is fun, if this is inclusive, if this is active beyond just survival, I think that we will make it happen. And I don't know, so those are my actions. And I would like to know, what do you think about it?
Yeah, thank you, Renata, for coming and sharing your provocations here with us. And I think we want to come back to some of these and unpack them with you after we hear a bit of a recap from what were some of the things that we learned and discussed so far that brought us to this point, and then take your provocations as ways to strengthen maybe where we can go from here. So I'm not sure if our virtual colleagues, Christine and Alex, are on their screens, but...
And in any case, feel free to disagree. You might say that, politics is not the root, that the UN system is broken, and that it has to be very serious, this.
Yeah, we can have a good brunch TV debate about So thank you. So to start off, we were going to go first, Christine, to hear about, in your session when you all talked about solar punk and hopefully imaginings, what did you all talk about, and do you have something you'd like us to discuss from your session?
Oh.
Now we hear you.
Oh, great. Okay, I'll be giving a little bit of a summary, and then, as you mentioned,
adding the question at the end. So in Solar Punk and Other Worlds, we explored the usefulness and potential limitations of solar punk as a concept. We learned that solar punk is against a one-size-fits-all ideology, and as such, it welcomes both harmony and dissonance among the many voices representing it. Solar punk, or perspectives and actions that might retroactively be called solar punk, are already happening largely in the global south by people who have already and disproportionately been experiencing the dramatic effects of climate change. These movements have their own names and heritages. As panelist Luisa Prado emphasized, we must therefore ask, who is the us when we talk about these visions of a sustainable future? Like a boomerang, wealthy nations are beginning to feel the effects of their extractivism, their colonialism, patriarchy, and ecocide. Climate change is knocking on their door, and this reveals the undeniable truth of our world. It's made of known and unknown human and inhuman connections, and these relationships span borders and time. To put this into perspective, it's estimated that about 50 new species are discovered each day, and we're always in the process of discovering how species interact to produce vital ecological outcomes, like soil health. Yet, in our short-termist, data-driven world, most everything is represented as measurable and therefore controllable. Given this fact, might there be wisdom in embracing the unknown? What does approaching other humans, non-humans, and the environment with more curiosity and humility look like in practice?
Beautiful. Would you like us to unpack that question in the round? I might lean to my excellent improviser, Andres, to...
No pressure. So, recap?
Or if you want to riff on Christine's question.
Oh. Can I...
With your own recap.
No, but
Okay.
maybe you can
As you
repeat the question, just to make sure
Sure,
I have it
sure.
clear.
It's about the role of embracing the unknown. So in a world that's, where we're in a capitalist world with quarterly returns and everything is kind of represented as measurable and therefore controllable. So in my work, I've come, more in this direction of this idea of, understanding the unknown. Like that there's much that is unknown. So for example, microscopic organisms in soil that contribute to soil health, and there's this kind of illusion, I think, in our society that we can measure everything. So for me, to sort of answer my own question, is one thing I found to be really interesting is this idea of just basically of rewilding, of giving the environment a little bit of space to do its thing, and sort of having a light hand as a steward. And so that would maybe be one practice in this regard. And I was just wondering if anyone else had other kind of notions of how we can embrace the unknown or approach our interaction with the environment with more humility, which I think, is a contrast to the sort of, controlled way we're approaching it at the moment.
Yes, definitely. So I think that, and in relation also to some of the points that Renata was raising, there is a very exciting challenge that especially westernized societies of us have, which is to unlearn that the only knowledge out there is scientific knowledge, very kind of colonial way of understanding knowledge. And, opening, as it was raised in a couple panels, opening the door to other forms of knowledge, and not only ancestral, like in a temporal scale, but also in terms of the value of, things like this, like oral communication, because we have become obsessed with the visual and very short attention spans. This is, again, in the space of the unknown, but the resonance of the stories, of the message, of the questions, when we feel the vibrations with our skin, is completely different than when we get it from the screens. And essentially, we end up lost in representations. Everything in the digital is a representation. Just think about the music that we listen on Spotify or other platforms. They are just a representation of the actual physical movements that originally created that music. And that is great because then millions of people can engage with those representations of the sounds, but then it is not the real sound. And this situation applies to a million things. So that space of the unknown, I would recap in the idea of trying of becoming aware in very different contexts, the academic, the political, the cultural, the difference between information, this obsession with data, different forms of knowledge in plural, and wisdom, where I feel is that we don't need to go back to anything, but actually to kind of clean ourselves and connect with that wisdom from the many peoples that have inhabit this world.
Beautiful.
I would have to like to add
Yeah,
something.
please.
Sorry. Something that I will also like to share is this romanticization of Global South. I know that Global South, I come from Guatemala, is suffering, a lot from the impact of actions from industrialized countries, but we are not saints, the thing is that the change of dynamics and the change of practices and the flexibility to open up to different solutions has to come from everywhere. And the responsibilities are allocated in all the communities. I have seen lots of bad practices as well, because somehow in communities I have worked with, the local common practice is so embedded into the social that it is hard to let go. It is hard to, for example, in my country, there's a practice to burn land to make it productive. That has to stop as well. I think that as younger generations, we need to let go some of the social practices and let go some of the things that belong to the past, and we might also be strict with indigenous knowledge, and it has to be to match the needs of today. It might have been valid pieces of knowledge for when the climate was at different conditions, when the water was different conditions, but it would be such a mistake. And I think that that's what makes Branch very interesting, such a mistake to give up science and technology just because of outdated practices. I think that what we need to do is to create a good flow of within these inequalities, to fix it by mixing and merging knowledges from all kinds, from everywhere, being focused and strategic on solving the tremendous challenges that we have before us. So, and that brings back to the solar punk imagining with more materials to create these new worlds.
Thank you. Maybe speaking of unknowns, Alex, maybe if you want to respond to Christine's question, you were talking about learners and their challenges with maybe head to your response.
Well, I don't know if it's really the unknown per se. I think it's really about the territory of establishing the known and then doing something about the known. And I think that's what my panel was about, which was absolutely about presenting different models. So for those of you who couldn't be there, we had the Extinction Rebellion Academy, Terra.do, and the Climate Literacy Project. All of them are doing complementary things when it comes to what knowledge can mean in the world right now. And I think it's absolutely taking the idea that you're moving beyond data and into models of education, whether that's community-based, whether that's completely opened up, or self-learning and advancement and professional advancement. And I think that was really the point to drive there, which is that there isn't so much a sort of amorphous landscape of learning. There are paths, and it's down to people to pick the path that they like. But I like that we live in a world where those paths exist. And I think that's what I really wanted to highlight with the panel. I think that 15, 20 years ago, those paths would have been expensive, not necessarily accessible to all, and certainly not available online in the ways that they are now. I would have liked to be able to bring much more social media focused education in the play, but at some point you reach a cap on how many conversations you think you can fill within an hour. But yeah, those are some very quick thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you. And Chris, would you like to respond to Chris?
Oh yeah, I think I can. Yes. What I found interesting from that panel and some of the ideas about if there is an unknown, but there are actually ways you can run through that. I mean, it was something that I think one of the panelists mentioned that I think Joe Springett said about this idea of Solarpunk as a container for you to test some ideas, and then if they don't work, that's okay, you'll learn from that. And that's not a million miles away from what you might consider of like the scientific model, where you're supposed to be testing something. If it doesn't work, then you move on to something else. And like we have seen lots and lots of progress along that. I think I think it's there was kind of, if there's one takeaway for me, it's this idea that you don't need to wait until you've got an entire perfect model figured out for how you think the world works or what your theory of change might actually be. And like when you were saying about the idea of like, okay, if there's politics, you don't need to, it's worth just doing something now. There are mechanisms, there are victories that are being won right now by people. Like you just look at, say, the Shell ruling in May with a Supreme Court basically saying, look, we're compelling a massive oil company to change their strategy. This was done, and there were absolute strategies, and there are things that we can apply and use for this. I think that's some of the stuff I would say that I felt useful from the Solarpunk piece. I'll hand back to you now because I'm not quite sure how to finish this one and come up with a really satisfying, quotable point, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I mean, the Solarpunk stuff is, I think, also a really great provocation to explore the unknowns, but with this hopeful attitude. And I think that also, this reclaiming of a hopeful attitude, even as you enter an unknown, I think for me was something I took from that conversation, and what I hope to kind of also challenge or channel through the work that we're doing. And I also appreciated in your panel, Andreas, that Eliza brought up the point of, always emphasizing the new, which is, makes us think about, discovering unknowns is also sometimes misplaced, and it's about sometimes reframing or revaluing and reassessing things that we already know. And so I think that also shift of understanding that knowledge was also, I think, a really important thread. Thank you, Christine. So then we also had, Andres, your great panel. What did you all talk about? What did you learn? And what would you like us to discuss from your session?
Well, we had an interesting conversation. I hope it was interesting, at least from the experience on the stage. It brought some interesting thoughts where essentially we started a conversation that we hope that opens more conversations, that becomes like a fractal conversation around a new word, which is intercitizenships, and which is, I don't want to give a definition because we don't want to define it. Then we also went across the value of hypothetical questions, and I asked Pia, Felipe, and Eliza to, according from their experiences, what are the most critical issues or challenges that the context of the digital economy is raising up today. And there were topics as the aesthetic dimension of the digital, meaning essentially, and maybe I'm doing a wrong interpretation from Felipe, but it's the invisibility of the digital, how we struggle with that. In relation to that, also with the scale of the digital, and then the issue of accessibility, because we take internet and the smartphones and the connectivity and 4G, 5G for granted, but there are millions of human beings that want that access, because another thing would be that some people really don't want to be part of that game, but other people need to be part of that game, and they don't have those resources, those access on even the literacy which I think that literacy is really, access to literacy would be a better way of frame the accessibility problem rather than accessibility to the tools. Then Eliza was talking about, from her own experience, the issues of embodiment that bring the digital, misinformation, as she's working on journalism, and also a very interesting topic, which is this kind of temporal dissonance between anything that we can imagine today, the urgency of an emergency, and how, for example, news are not really designed to talk about or to cover futures. So there was this idea of, how can we fact-check futures or utopias? And then Pia was raising the issue of the dissonance between all the possibilities for collaboration at scale that the digital technologies allow, and then the kind of gaps between that potential and the realities of grassroots communities. Also how we are stuck in our very territorial nation-state-based understanding of our identities, and then the issues of validation of those identities. So that was the first part, and the second part was about trying to do a collective imagination exercise of, let's say like this idea of becoming responsible citizens of planet Earth scaled in a period of 1 billion seconds, 3 decades more or less. How would that world be? Because we believe that if we're not able to imagine it, that what is the price of imagining it? But if we lose that capacity, then we are doomed. So we need to imagine those possible worlds that we want to, more than live, I guess, it's to give to the next generations. Because even the IPCC reports is referring like what we do today, like in the next 5 minutes, tomorrow, the next weeks, is not for us, maybe, but it will be more for the humans inhabiting planet Earth 20 years from now. So this, I think, is a very important concept to digest collectively, because of course all of this, if we are kind of isolated watching the news, can be terrifying. So here I now should bring a question, right? So the question that I want to bring to the screen, the table, this space-time, is about what if, hypothetical, what if there was some sort of global consensus across media, politics, academia, on reframing the climate crisis, the climate change, all of this, or the climate problem, as an emergency instead of a problem. So in this hypothetical, the question is, or the smaller question is, do emergencies have solutions? Should we act fast or slow, or fast and slow, to address an emergency? What is the difference between framing the climate crisis, as a problem, or as an emergency?
Chris? Yeah?
Okay, I can pick up on some of that stuff. The question of what if we frame this as an emergency, I think it's actually quite helpful in a lot of ways, because when I think about this, I think it kind of implies this change in how we think about like climate action, rather than being about get your carbon footprint or get your organizational impact down to zero, but more about in terms of what does your emergency response look like? What does your climate response look like? And that shifts the discussion from being, rather than being about how small can you make something, it's how big can you make something? How transformational can you make something? And I think like this is a really helpful idea to introduce into the discourse. And like I actually found the intercitizenship also really nice as an idea. I mean, the idea of like, okay, there's internationalism and stuff like that, but kind of tying it to something like the internet, where you can embed those values into some of this stuff, is really nice. It feels like touching on, I think, what Eliza, oh God, I'm so sorry. Eliza, she was speaking about this idea of like empathy and care. And I think that you can end up with a language of like care at scale, like an internet of care, the idea that you can actually think about people and then embody that in the technology you build, or the tooling that you build, or even the kind of, I guess, some of the governing structures that you embed into that we use to kind of mediate our society, the way the internet does do. And I'll hand that back now, actually.
Ready.
She's ready, right?
Yes. Yes, so emergency, like I'm a lawyer by training, for this is a blessing and a curse. And so I have to think about this if it was a global emergency and declared such, it will inevitably erode democracy, and we will not all have a say on that, It concentrates power. It gives executive powers. It concentrates power into your appointed leaders. The first step is the leadership we have today the one that we want to handle an emergency? That's the first question. The other is, with these extraordinary powers that you give to some actors, comes also the forced unity to mobilize. And we have another, like political reality, and it seems like, usually in these circles that we belong to, we are so reluctant to talk about politics, but politics are a reality. This is the China problem and the Russia problem. If we declare this as an emergency, we need China, we need Russia. They are like, our comrades that have to sit at the table, at the power table, and work in the solutions without, in a bipolar or multipolar world, the emergency framing is not going to work. We need the technology and we need the political will of all the UN Security Council, basically. We need consensus, global consensus, and we cannot be like decoupling technology and in these stupid fights for more money when we face an existential threat. And the most important point, and is the tough point, and is the sexy point on this framing of emergency, during an emergency in most of the countries and in the global system, corporations has to be subordinated to the state. In an emergency, you can seize assets. In an emergency, you can declare public, you can expropriate. Imagine, and you can force companies to stop doing things. Simply force things, and it seems unconceivable. Why it seems unconceivable? Our global system has the power to make those kind of things happen, to shut down the 6 most polluting companies. If there was this emergency declaration with the global consensus, we could make it happen, actually. And what it is stopping from doing that, it is probably corporate power. If I think of in those terms, it is not, it's I think it's the 3 things: lack of leadership, this constant, fight and competition, China, Russia, US, that is back, and Europe in the middle as a just useless mediator, basically, and then we have that corporate power controlling everything. It is that's my answer to your suggestion. Yes, as an emergency, with all of that and with the implications of that, It might not be the word that we dream of, but it's the word during an emergency. It is not forever. It's just a transition to a new reconfiguration of things.
Alex, I saw your hand up, and then Christine.
Yeah, I was thinking about what you're saying, Renata, which is also perhaps also admitting to ourselves that there are emergencies that we have chosen not to particularly care for or address. And I think of healthcare or public health emergencies around the world that were deemed either not important enough or not important enough to the West. I think of what's happened only in the past 2-3 weeks in Afghanistan and in Texas. These are, by any definition of democracy and any definition of human rights, emergencies, and how we address a global sense of emergency versus a localized sense of emergency, where I think the local will always trump the global, because someone's ability to get out of a country because they need to get their family across a border is always going to feel more urgent than something that is happening possibly in the next season or even 2-3 months ahead. And I think the internet, I wonder whether the rest of the panel has a thought on the internet being a particularly good or bad actor when it comes to thinking about those senses of time and those stories about time. There's a repetitive nature to social media practices where the same content is churned over and over again, and we forget where it comes from, we forget where it was first issued, we forget even who the author is. And I think that there's something interesting in exploring what the internet allows us in terms of views on time, and what this sense of local versus global when it comes to emergencies, because I think we could probably define lots of different things that are happening right this moment as we sit here, or I sit where I am, in the island of Brexit, with food shortages and God knows what else. Yeah, everyone's got a definition for emergency, and I think there are some emergencies we've just not treated as emergencies, and what the internet can allow us to do with that complexity in mind.
Christine, would you like to respond?
Sure, yeah. Well, yeah, of course, we've heard this elsewhere as well, but COVID kind of modeled on a smaller scale, like a reaction to an emergency. Of course, compared to climate change, it's different. There's a kind of silver bullet technology, imperfect as they are, but there are the vaccines, whereas climate change pretty much requires like everyone everywhere to be working on it. But nonetheless, to Renata's point, I really agree. I think part of, living under a capitalist paradigm is that in emergencies, we've seen, as with COVID, essential workers just being worked to the bone and burning out, under this like completely untenable system. So I don't know, if regardless of whether or not we call it an emergency, climate change is one. But I think for us to handle this well, we must really like challenge these notions of how we structure society and, crucially make coalitions between essential workers and really do some good movement building like from the ground up, because it's not really at the moment going to come from the top down. And then, as far as like digital spaces mitigating or supporting, I think they do both, of course, digital spaces facilitate movement making, connecting people. But of course, we have divisive psyops being run on ad networks. We have like an ever updating social media timeline that, is not designed for human bodies. And these things have kind of, I've noticed created kind of a collective brain fog. They really disorient us all, and keep us from acting. So definitely resisting those forces and kind of curating the way we engage online is really important there.
Beautiful, thank you. Yeah, and I think this question is really interesting because it evokes me also this question of who are the emergency responders and how are they being cared for, how are they protected, as well as bringing their service if we call this a climate emergency. So that makes me think of also, systems of care as well. And also what kinds of like emergency communications would look like or emergency narratives, because I think one of the things we saw with the pandemic when that started to be treated also like an emergency was like a total shift in how, daily press briefings from governments or top of the fold coverage on newspapers with, tracking the progress of these things. And I feel like the really understanding this as an emergency would also shift how you would prioritize everything from storytelling, narratives, journalism, press conference, like all those things would also come hopefully to the fore. But I also really appreciated your point out also the legal implications of emergency was really exciting.
But one of the things that you just mentioned is like such a focus on let's change the economic model. But it's not only the economic model, the model that we need to change. Yeah. The communications, the media and communications model is completely broken. It's not isolated from the economic model, but it's something else. It crosses cultural, it crosses political, it crosses these big geopolitics points, it is also infrastructure. And when we address the climate emergency as such, we need to look at all these broken models. And the political model at the end of the day, who do you want to have these extraordinary powers to fix things? And will this person even have resources to make it happen? Because then the other problem is the austerity problem, which is the big solidarity deficit that we have, which connects again with corporations. And it's
Can I?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, you mentioned the keyword that I think is at the core of more than the idea of a declaration. The consensus is important, but I think is both solidarity. So I don't know if any of you on the screens or here has experienced an emergency. But what naturally happens, because we all have solidarity inside us, is that your behavior changes. You as a human being, your humanity will flourish. You will try to help the other. You see this happening in many situations like earthquakes or fires that are kind of time-condensed emergencies, but then the whole story of the global pandemic also gave us a lot of lessons of the kind of different, it is an emergency of emergencies, right? And I think that this exercise of understanding it as an emergency is crucial to challenge this dominant narrative that is coming from the Silicon Valley of moving fast and breaking things, that is very much in the idea of testing and like, how do you call that? Iterating, and there are already too many broken things and we need to repair. But if you are in an emergency, you first address the emergency. So I'm not an expert in emergencies, but I know from living in a place where there were frequent earthquakes that the thing that you do when there's an earthquake, an emergency, is keep calm, move slow. That's very important because that gives you a better way to address something that is, emergencies happen to you. You don't choose, oh, that's an emergency because I say it. They happen, they are happening to us. So another conversation, of course, is the causes, who is responsible, etc. So I just want to highlight this point of the need to cultivate that solidarity and how the infrastructures of that we refer to as the internets are incredibly useful to scale that solidarity, to improve it, to delocalize it. We can practice solidarity with people who are far away from us, or we can choose to prepare, which is the kind of prelude of an emergency, is to be prepared. And there are protocols, there are many emergencies, so it is not a new thing. It's more like a political choice that we cannot rely to the current political systems.
So Alex, you had the third panel. Would you like to share what you learned from it, and if there's something you want us to discuss?
No, I think this has really been an attempt to showcase the best and the brightest when it comes to using the internet for climate education. And so we really talked about the different models that exist out there. We talked about how cohort and communities of people are, to an extent, designed as part of educational experiences, the different models that exist as presented by the different panelists. We talked about how reward schemes are designed or not. And I think that that's also really interesting. There's a really interesting question in there, which I'd appreciate sort of more thoughts from everyone else, which is, should it be rewarding to learn about the climate? Should it be rewarding to, and should reward be an ultimate sort of model for engagement, as opposed to, say, something that feels like it's a need rather than something that requires a reward. I guess finally kind of thinking through, and I don't think it appears much when it comes to climate change education, but some of the darker areas of our interaction with the internet, which have to do with misinformation, which have to do with disengagement, which have to do with really entertainment models, how they affect how one goes through a journey of education and goes through a journey of learning. And I think that in the panel, everyone, I think, was quite, positive and positively driven by the things that they're doing, but it kind of left me with some hanging questions around what completion means and what learning means in perhaps areas of the world where communities are very small around these topics, or deemed still, as my prime minister calls it, bunny hugging. How we are still in many parts of the world not really considering ourselves in an emergency. And so what role does education and online education take then It makes me think more broadly about the reasons why I put the panel together in the first place, which is, should this kind of training, learning experience really permeate primary school, secondary school, university, no matter whether you think you want it or not, in the same way that we might teach kids about wearing masks and washing their hands. So yeah, these are all some of the things that we both talked about and some of the things that I'm left with.
Would anyone like to pick up?
I'll give this a go. Should they be rewarding? I think it depends what your definition of a reward might actually be, right? If you're coming to some of these courses because you're trying to find some purpose, it's very common that when you do come through this, you end up with a greater sense of purpose because you've got an idea, you've had a chance to kind of think about it and have some kind of mental model that helps you make sense of things and then focus some of those feelings into something actually productive. And like one of the questions I asked about, basically around anger, around climate, was really, I felt quite well handled because it did say, well, yeah, this is the thing, or there's a process that you run through. And they were talking about this idea that, yeah, you can be stuck in a kind of point where you might feel fatalistic or feel really furious. You're not able to do anything around it. And they were able to point to things like, yeah, there's a stage that we handle grief. There's other models that you can use. And it means you can get past this idea of being stuck and you can kind of go like, okay, doomer, and then move to the kind of other bits. I thought that was actually quite useful. I think the other thing that's kind of touching on this idea of rewarding is, I guess the idea of like what you think is rewarding is what you've grown up with or what you have been taught. And let's say you look in America where you're taught from the very beginning to kind of like honor a flag and be really patriotic. I can totally see a scenario where you might teach people to essentially find it rewarding to be respecting life globally or wanting to fight for these things. Not necessarily like a violent fight, but the idea of take a stand in various places or in cases like engage using the tools available to you, like the political process or using laws, which are what were used to win some recent cases. So I think there are some quite hopeful messages that I took away from that. I'll hand back to anyone else who wants to help me out here, basically.
I mean, okay. I think it's two kind of learning. It's understanding the problem and also the skills for survival that kids will need. I think that it is a lot of many parts of our education are completely useless for what we are going to face. I mean, there's some things that are like things in the latest report, things that we cannot change. And we have to be realistic about that. And problems that it is, whatever we do, we are going to face. And we are not preparing there's such a mismatch between the education system, the popular education system, and the face that the threat where we are facing. And that's one of the immediate actions that we need to activate. And it's this impossibility of one size fits all. It is not. I mean, children in Guatemala, we are seeing the impact of climate change with children going through deserts to go to the US to have food, basically. And we are not reading the signs. We are not reading the signs, and we are not treating that as a climate emergency. And we are not treating that even as an emergency, and that's not only happening there, it's happening everywhere. It's going to only increase. If the average of a kid inside the education system in my country is 4 years, the skills that they learned during those years, if they are only going to be schooled 4 years, are those the skills that they need to operate in a foreign country and being displaced, and are the culture and the values and the things that children in rich countries learning matching the needs of receiving lots of people from other countries? Not at all, yes, recycle and use solar energy, great, but it is completely, from the environmental education, the social part of it is completely missing. So it's not. I think it's not about rewards. It's about a lot of work and making it mandatory, and again activating bringing the relevant parties, the relevant leadership at the table. And it is one of the, I think that the education even is as equally complex as the corporate power one.
Alex, did you want to add to it? Oh, you get an applause here.
I was, I was just going to kind of chime in by saying, I think also education is teaching people how to have uncomfortable conversations, because I think we're all going to have uncomfortable conversations with the people around us for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's a very essential point, the shift away from everything that, especially in Westernized societies, we have been taught that is the ideal life, to be comfortable, to be rewarded, to be happy. That is the meaning of life. Those kind of things. And part of this is, I will get slightly philosophical, but it's also in a very practical way. Is the difference between education and learning. So for me, education is very linear, and a lot of the issues that we have in all of these systems is with the linearity and centricity. And I will quote my friend Ted Hunt, critical design researcher, that says climate is everything. So when we say or refer to climate education, I think it's very important to decategorize fields of knowledge, and really understand that while there are very practical sets of skills and very practical scientific-based methods and understandings of the impacts, to really aspire to go through everything that we are going to experience in the next couple decades, we need to kind of more than change is transform, and that kind of transformation, I like to think of it more as healing. You know, when I have a scar here, I know I will heal. So it's that kind of transformation that our systems are already kind of designed for that. So there are three aspects as a kind of alternative to a reward system, which is understanding that learning needs to be holistic, inclusive, not like saying that climate is one thing, it's everything again. So it's collective, it needs to be collective, it needs to be multidirectional. It cannot be like saying that somebody has the authority and say, I will teach you. It needs to be more an exchange. It needs to be critical in order to be constructive, and it needs to be plural. So there's, I think, the conditions for that kind of transfer to happen. And this, connecting back with what we were discussing around solidarity, I think is the intention of understanding that, yes, many of these issues are already about survival for many, many people and non-humans. That is very important. But maybe we can think of it as also as a matter of solidarity. And solidarity has a very, I think Eduardo Galeano said something like, charity is vertical, so it's kind of, it doesn't question the status quo, it doesn't question the ladder, but solidarity is horizontal. Solidarity is, in essence, is about learning about the other, cultivating that empathy, and being responsible, right? And then acting as well. So I think that if we start shifting this, and it start with the words again, with the language, shifting into a narrative of solidarity. Solidarity is super fun, I think. Solidarity is a space where we will feel comfortable in a different way, because we will not feel ourselves as users, as consumers, or as students in a classroom. We will feel ourselves as a whole, as a collective, connected with the plants, because we are the same. We are one. So I'll stop there.
That was beautiful. Well, we only have 2 minutes left of this time, and I might want to ask just to do one super last go around with, if you want to share a phrase or a thing you want to take with you from the end of the day. Christine?
Well, yeah, I think I'm still on Andre's point around, solidarity, and actually, and that in the context of climate education. I have a friend here who's doing incredible work on pedagogy, as it relates to climate change, and she actually brings her students out to climate protests. And so, kind of embedding these practices in the community context, both from a human perspective, like a climate protest, but also she brings them out to the forest, they plant a garden together, and so the children engage with, in human life as well. And I think that's a pretty good recipe for combating the sort of, the dopamine hijacking of some digital spaces and the effect this is having on children.
Yeah, beautiful. Alex?
I'm going to go with the classic, which is think global, act local.
Chris?
Understand the levers you already have. There's loads out there that we can use, and it's not like we're totally hopeless. There are laws that are there are processes. Not everything is perfect, but we're not starting from zero in lots of places, and we really should be aware of that, because we're watching kids start from this place, and they're winning lots of time. We just need to help them win more.
Renata?
Okay, we should stay united in purpose and focus, open to learn, open to listen to the other side and to the opponent, and opening spaces for that to happen, and ready to lead. I mean, if someone, like the leaders that we have seen lately, managed to get up there, I mean, it cannot be that complicated, and it is a shame that it's not better people leading us. And if there's no better people, risking that, why not to take the next step? I'm just for the Europeans, European elections, if you want to be candidate, if you want to be parliamentarian, the European Parliament, where many of the money and the decisions are happening, you have to start your campaign today. So I hope that one of the panelists is elected in the next election. Cannot wait.
Awesome. Thank you. Andres?
Well, I would synthesize in just a few words, which is that it is time to heal, and that healing is something that you can only do with and for others. So it's I don't know if some of you have experienced anxiety and go to therapy, or to an app, but the app or the therapist will tell you the best way, if you are struggling with your own fears, help someone else, and that will help dissolve that fear. So imagine if that gets viral, right? Why not? So.
Beautiful, thank you. And I would like to take away gratitude, a huge thank you to all of the panelists and moderators and speakers, Christine, Sarah, Louisa, Andres, Eliza, Felipe, Pia, Alexandra, David, Anshuma, Emma, Renata, Chris, thanks for organizing with me. I wanted to particularly thank Ruth, who's probably helping make this stream happen. Thank you, Ruth. Woohoo! Thank you to the Ars Electronica team for having us. It was a total pleasure. Thank you also for everyone who was here in person and online. We have, after this, there's an award ceremony outside, which I also encourage people to check out if you can. There's an exhibition ongoing where we're exhibiting some of these ideas and other wonderful works in the exhibition hall. You can have a zine. We hope to have future issues of Branch, maybe helping to share these parts of the conversation in future issues. We hope to see you in Barcelona or on the internet for the I Am Internet festival in November. And Chris, is there anything else people should do or think about?
I think it might be good for us to say thank all the people who wrote and designed and worked on Branch in the first place, because without them, we wouldn't be here. So yeah, thanks, folks. Yeah, that's the other thing as well.
Great. Thank you all so much, and have a good rest of your Ars Electronica.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle.